Don't move. You're acting suspicious. The barked command split the air like a gunshot. Amara Lewis froze where she stood, her arms wrapped tightly around the two small children pressed against her hips. Both of them were trembling, their dark eyes wide with confusion and terror. Only seconds earlier, they had been laughing under the late afternoon sun. Now, their playground had turned into a stage for fear. The voices belonged to Officers Mark Henderson and Dale Whitaker, two white patrolmen in their 40s, broad-shouldered, square-jawed, their hands steady as they leveled their service pistols. Henderson, the taller of the two, carried himself with the restless authority of a man who had never once questioned his right to dominate a scene. Whitaker, stockier, with thinning blonde hair and an expression permanently twisted into suspicion, mirrored him step for step. And their weapons were aimed squarely at Amara. She felt her heartbeat hammer against her ribs. But her voice, when it emerged, was calm, even incredulous. "I'm just playing with my children." Her words sounded almost absurd against the sight of drawn guns. Around them, the park was dappled with sunlight. Toddlers toddled, parents called out reminders about juice boxes and scraped knees. The smell of freshly cut grass hung in the air. It should have been an ordinary, peaceful evening. But now, silence rippled outward from the confrontation. Families stopped mid-motion. Conversations faltered. A mother yanked her child closer by the wrist. Even the laughter of children seemed to wither, as the tension swallowed the park whole. Henderson's lip curled. He took half a step closer, his weapon unwavering. "Don't move," he thundered. "People like you are never innocent." The words landed like a slap, brazen. Naked prejudice spoken without hesitation, without shame. Amara's sons clung tighter. Jordan, the elder at 8, buried his face into his mother's coat. Little Caleb, barely 6, whimpered aloud. His thin arms locked around Amara's waist as if to anchor them both against the storm of authority bearing down. Amara herself quivered. Fear seared through her veins, but she steadied it with something harder, something colder. For years she had trained to stand her ground, to calculate, to resist intimidation. Slowly, with deliberate clarity, she shifted her weight, free hand moving toward the inside pocket of her jacket. Whitaker's voice lashed out instantly. "I said don't move." But Amara didn't stop. In one swift motion, she pulled free a small leather wallet, flipping it open so the badge within gleamed in the sunlight. Her voice rang out, sharp as steel, "I'm FBI. You're making a serious mistake." For the briefest instant, the world seemed to hold its breath. Naomi peeked up. Grace's sobs quieted into hiccups. "Wait a second. If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps us." Even the onlookers leaned forward, as though this declaration alone could banish the insanity unfolding before their eyes. But Henderson only laughed, short and sharp, the sound like gravel against metal. He leaned close enough to glimpse a faint scratch running across the laminated surface of her identification. His grin widened with mockery. "Cheap fake. Black folks like you always have some scam ready, don't you?" Whitaker chuckled too, emboldened by his partner's scorn. Their guns remained trained on her chest, fingers curled with casual menace. Amara's jaw tightened. She could feel the weight of every stare. Neighbors, strangers, families who had moments ago been strangers sharing a public park. Now, they were silent jurors, witnesses to degradation in real time. A few had already raised their phones, recording, lenses gleaming like judgment. The air itself thickened, pressing against her skin. The park's once gentle warmth curdled into suffocation. She could see how the narrative was being written in their eyes. A black woman, dangerous by default. A mother's embrace twisted into the posture of a criminal resisting arrest. Her sons shook against her body, too young to understand the machinery grinding into place, but old enough to feel its crushing weight. Still, Amara refused to drop her arm. She held the badge aloft, fingers trembling but grip unbroken, as though the sheer act of keeping it raised could carve out a space for truth amid the lie closing around her. The crowd shifted uneasily. A man muttered under his breath. A woman pressed her palm to her lips. Children asked their parents questions too soft to be answered. But Henderson and Whitaker only advanced. Their authority filled the silence, swelling to suffocate reason. The simple reality that a mother in a park was being treated as prey collapsed beneath their presumption of guilt. Henderson spat words like venom. On your knees. Now. Caleb whimpered again. Jordan buried her face deeper. Amara drew one long breath, forcing her voice to steady. I'm not resisting. I'm not a threat. I am a federal agent. And the longer you ignore that, the worse this mistake becomes. She wanted her sons to hear the strength, not the terror. She wanted them to know their mother was not powerless, even as 2 pistols marked her as less than human. But the laughter of the officers told her otherwise. To them, she was already guilty. To them, the badge was nothing more than another prop in a predictable script: black body, counterfeit authority, excuse to humiliate. And around them, the world held its breath. Phones continued to record. Eyes widened. Whispers spread. A summer afternoon had cracked open to reveal the jagged bones of prejudice and power, raw, undeniable, and dangerous. Amara stood at the center of it, her children pressed against her ribs, the weight of every gaze pulling down on her spine. She could feel her own pulse in her throat, hear the thrum of her blood against her ears, and yet she did not lower her hand. Not when they mocked her, not when they dismissed her, not even as she realized the truth. This confrontation was no longer about her badge. It was about her existence. And the world, gathered around in horrified silence, was about to see exactly how far that denial would go. The command came like a whip. Turn around. Hands behind your back. Amara Lewis stiffened. She could feel her son's arms locking tighter around her waist, their sobs breaking into the heavy silence of the crowd. Jordan cried, "Mom, no!" Caleb's small hands trembled so violently he could hardly hold on. Officer Mark Henderson stepped forward, his shadow cutting across the grass. He was a tall man, mid-40s, with a chest that strained against his uniform shirt. Years on the force had made his voice gravelly and sharp, a voice that carried the weight of assumed authority. He seized Amara's wrist with an iron grip, twisting it back until her shoulder burned. "Face forward," he barked. Amara's knees buckled, but she held herself upright, eyes locked on her children. "Don't be afraid," she whispered to them, low enough that only they could hear. Officer Dale Whitaker moved in from behind, shorter than Henderson, with thinning blonde hair and a smirk that never seemed to leave his face. Whitaker carried himself like a man who took pleasure in humiliation. He snapped the cuffs over Amara's wrists with a flourish, then leaned close enough for her to feel his breath. "Figures," he sneered. "A criminal pretending to be a mother. Those boys of yours will follow in your footsteps soon enough." Jordan gasped. Caleb let out a cry that pierced the quiet park like broken glass. The crowd's reaction was a mix of murmurs, shuffling feet, and uneasy silence. A man in a business suit shook his head but said nothing. A woman with a stroller glanced away, as if distance could absolve her of complicity. Phones stayed lifted, cameras recording, but no voice rose above the officers. Henderson shoved Amara forward. "Move!" Every step pulled her farther from her sons, who clung until Whitaker pried them loose. Jordan fought, kicking against his shin, but he only tightened his grip, his face twisted with irritation. Caleb's sobs broke into hiccups as he was dragged toward another patrol unit. "Where are you taking them?" Amara's voice cracked, raw with fear. "Protective services," Henderson said curtly, his hand pressing against the small of her back to force her into motion. "You won't be seeing them again anytime soon." Amara's chest tightened, the world blurred. The laughter of children on the swings, the scent of sun-warmed grass, the brightness of daylight, all of it warped into a nightmare. Her son's cries echoed behind her as she was shoved toward the black and white patrol car. Henderson opened the rear door with a jerk. "In you go." Amara stumbled as Whitaker shoved her down, metal cuffs biting into her wrists. Her body hit the hard vinyl seat, her head snapping back against the frame. The slam of the door sealed her inside, the glass a barrier between her and the world she had tried to protect. Outside, her sons were being escorted away. Tiny figures swallowed by the crowd and the cold bureaucracy of the state. Amara pressed her forehead to the glass, helpless, as Jordan's voice rose above the noise. "Mom, don't let them take us." The car lurched into motion. The sound of the engine drowned out everything else. The precinct smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a sickly pallor. The clang of a heavy door announced Amara's arrival as Henderson and Whitaker shoved her inside. The holding room was bare. Steel chair bolted to the floor, a scratched metal table, walls the color of dirty snow. Amara stumbled as Whitaker pushed her down. The back of her knees struck the chair, and she collapsed into it, cuffs digging deeper into her wrists. To the officers, she wasn't Amara Lewis, lawyer, federal agent, mother. To them, she was just another black suspect, a body to be subdued, mocked, and forgotten. Whitaker leaned against the table, arms folded, his smirk broadening. "So, special agent, huh? Tell me, which cereal box did you pull that badge from?" Laughter burst from the other officers scattered around the room. Uniformed men, some younger, some older, all basking in the spectacle of power. Henderson poured himself a cup of coffee and raised it in mock salute. "Call it in," Amara said evenly. Her voice was steady, though her pulse hammered in her throat. "You'll see it's real." "Call it in?" Henderson echoed, savoring the words. "Lady, the only thing real about you is the rap sheet you'll have by the time we're done." The laughter swelled. Amara's shoulders stiffened. "I want to make a phone call." Her words landed with clarity, cutting through the derision like a blade. For a moment the room went still. Then came the eruption. A chorus of chuckles, guffaws, even mock applause. One officer clutched his stomach as if the demand were the funniest thing he'd heard all week. "Go ahead," Whitaker said between laughs. "Call whoever you want. Let's see who's stupid enough to pick up." More laughter. The room shook with it, their voices ricocheting off the walls, drowning out reason. Amara lifted her chin. The cuffs bit into her skin, but she ignored the pain. Her eyes, dark and unflinching, swept across the room. She saw Henderson's smug grin, Whitaker's mocking gaze, the indifference etched into the faces of men who believed they could never be held accountable. Inside, the humiliation burned like fire. But beneath it, something colder stirred, a resolve forged from years of seeing this very arrogance destroy lives. She thought of her sons, separated from her now, crying in the arms of strangers. She thought of every case file she had worked on, every family she had defended against abuses like this. "This is the last laugh you'll get," she said quietly, but with a force that stilled even the jeering for a heartbeat. Henderson frowned, the first flicker of unease breaking through his confidence. Amara met his eyes, unblinking. "I know my rights, and you know it too." The laughter wavered. Some officers exchanging glances, but Henderson barked again, trying to reclaim control. "Sit down and shut your mouth." Amara didn't move. Her wrists ached, her body throbbed from the shoves and the seatbelt buckle digging into her side. But her spirit held firm. She would not bend to their mockery. Instead, she lifted her head, her voice low but unshakable. "One phone call. That's all I need." The words settled over the room like a warning. The officers chuckled again, but softer this time, their confidence thinning, though they didn't yet know why. Whitaker smirked as if to dismiss her defiance. "Sure, make your call. Let's see who comes running." They didn't know. Not yet. But Amara did. And as she stared them down, her eyes bright with defiance, she knew the moment of reversal was already in motion. This chorus of laughter, this room thick with contempt would be remembered as their last victory. Amara drew in a slow breath. She could taste metal, fear, resolve all at once. Her body trembled from exhaustion, but her gaze burned steady. Surrounded by sneers and cruelty, she held to the single truth that anchored her. She was not powerless. And before long, these men would discover just how grave a mistake they had made. The precinct was still echoing with laughter when the first sound of sirens cut through the night. It began faint, distant, a low hum that might have been ignored. But within minutes, the rising wail grew unmistakable. Tires screeched. Engines roared. The officers lounging in the bullpen stiffened. Coffee cups halted midway to lips. Heads turned toward the windows. Then came the sight. A line of black SUVs pulling up hard against the curb, their plates marked with federal insignia. Doors flew open. Men and women in tactical vests spilled out, weapons slung, movements crisp and purposeful. These weren't local uniforms. These were federal agents. At their head strode Special Agent Richard Cole, a man built like a stone wall in his early 50s. His hair, iron gray, was cut close to the scalp. His pale blue eyes were sharp, almost cold, set in a face carved by decades of discipline. Cole was known inside the Bureau for his severity, an unyielding commander, the kind who measured his words carefully and left no room for interpretation. He was not just Amara Lewis's superior. Years ago he had been her instructor at Quantico. To this day he carried himself with the same commanding stillness that had unnerved recruits into excellence. The station doors burst open under his hand. The chatter inside died instantly. The local officers, men who had been mocking minutes earlier, snapped upright as Cole entered, flanked by a dozen armed agents. The atmosphere flipped in a single heartbeat. Amara sat cuffed in the steel chair, wrists raw, back straight despite the ache in her shoulders. She didn't move. She didn't have to. The shift in power had already begun. Cole's eyes swept the room. When he spoke, his voice was even, but it carried like thunder. "Who arrested her?" Henderson and Whitaker exchanged glances, suddenly pale. Henderson cleared his throat. "Sir, she presented a false badge. False?" Cole's tone sliced the air. He advanced, boots striking the floor like hammer blows. He took the badge from Amara's cuffed hand, turning it in the harsh fluorescent light. His gaze flicked to her, then back to the two officers. "This badge is real. This woman is a federal agent, and you have committed a serious crime." A ripple went through the room. The local officers who had laughed now froze, their grins sliding away like masks abandoned. Amara lifted her chin. Her voice rang out steady and sharp. "You two are finished." The words didn't come as a shout. They didn't need to. In that charged silence, they landed heavier than any scream. Cole straightened, his eyes never leaving Henderson and Whitaker. "You aimed your weapons at a federal agent in front of civilian witnesses. You dismissed her credentials, and you humiliated her in custody." His voice hardened, each word deliberate. "Every second of it is on record." He gestured to the agents behind him. Already they were pulling up feeds from the park's security cameras, screens glowing with frozen images, Amara clutching her children, pistols aimed at her chest, and there were more. Cell phone videos from bystanders, uploaded and circulating, digital evidence spreading like wildfire. Whitaker's mouth opened and closed. His smirk was gone. His face looked waxy, drained. "Sir, we thought—" "You thought?" Cole's voice cracked like a whip. "You thought her skin color invalidated her authority. You thought your arrogance would erase the truth?" The room was silent, but for the faint hum of the monitors. Cole turned toward the watching officers, his voice pitched to carry to every corner. "Let me be clear. Agent Amara Lewis is a member of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. She serves in the division tasked with investigating abuses of power in law enforcement, and tonight she has become the victim of exactly the crime she has dedicated her career to pursuing." Gasps broke out. Officers shifted uncomfortably. Henderson's face was ashen. For Amara, the moment carried the strange unreality of vindication. She had been mocked, cuffed, separated from her sons. Now the truth was no longer just hers to claim. It was undeniable, laid bare in front of those who had spat on it. Her cuffs were unlocked. The steel fell away from her wrists with a sharp click. She rose slowly, her body stiff but her gaze unbroken. The room seemed to tilt around her as every eye fixed on the reversal. She stepped forward into the open space. Henderson and Whitaker shrank back as if her presence alone indicted them more than Cole's words ever could. Then came the sound that broke her composure. "Mom!" Jordan's voice, high and desperate. The door to the hallway burst open, and he ran inside, his face streaked with tears. Behind him, Caleb stumbled in, hiccuping sobs, guided by a federal agent. Both boys rushed forward, colliding into her arms with the force of relief. Amara dropped to her knees, pulling them tight against her chest. Her eyes stung. She buried her face in Jordan's hair, felt Caleb's trembling arms circle her neck. "I've got you," she whispered, voice breaking. "I've got you." The room seemed to vanish. There were no officers, no cameras, no gawking eyes, just the heat of her sons pressed against her. their sobs muffled into her coat. When she finally rose, she kept her hands on their shoulders, anchoring them beside her. Her gaze swept the room, landing on the two men who had shattered her children's sense of safety. Henderson tried again, his words stumbling. "It was a mistake, we didn't." Cole cut him off. "You pointed loaded weapons at a mother holding her children. You dismissed her lawful authority. You mocked her in custody. That is not a mistake. That is criminal conduct." Whitaker's eyes darted around, seeking some ally, but none came. The other officers looked away, shame prickling at their collars. Cole turned back to Amara. For the first time, his stern features softened, though his voice remained steady. "Agent Lewis, you're free to go. We'll take it from here." Amara nodded, one hand tightening on Jordan's shoulder, the other on Caleb's. She didn't need to say anything more. The evidence was already undeniable. The reversal was complete. But inside, she knew the fight wasn't finished. Tonight had shown her something deeper, that even as an agent of the law, she was not shielded from its prejudice. Her sons had seen it firsthand. They had felt it, and no vindication could erase that memory. Still, for now she stood taller, their small bodies pressed close to her sides, as Henderson and Whitaker crumbled in the face of their unraveling authority. The tide had turned, and the storm was only beginning. The precinct's laughter had long since died. By dawn it was replaced with a different sound, the metallic clink of handcuffs locking shut. Officers Mark Henderson and Dale Whitaker stood in the very same room where they had mocked Amara Lewis only hours earlier. Now their wrists were bound, their badges stripped away, their futures collapsing in on themselves. Outside, the scene had drawn a crowd. Reporters jostled behind barricades, microphones raised, cameras flashing. News vans lined the curb, satellite dishes angled skyward. When the precinct doors opened and Henderson and Whitaker were marched out by federal agents, the frenzy ignited. Flashes erupted, a staccato of white light capturing their disgrace. Henderson, once so rigid in his authority, stared at the ground, jaw tight with panic. Whitaker, whose smirk had seemed carved into his face, now looked hollowed, pale as chalk. The questions rained down. "Officers, do you deny the charges? Were you aware she was a federal agent? Do you have any comment for her children?" Neither man answered. Their silence was swallowed by the roar of shutters and the hiss of live broadcasts. What had been an evening of arrogance was now a spectacle of ruin. By midday, the story had broken nationwide. Headlines scrolled across every network. "Black mother. Federal agent. Humiliated and arrested. Caught on camera. Police ignore FBI credentials. Never innocent. Racially charged arrest sparks outrage." The video spread with wildfire speed. On television, in news feeds, on phones across the country, the same images played again and again. Amara clutching Jordan and Caleb as guns were aimed at her chest, her voice firm as she raised her badge. Henderson's mocking dismissal, Whitaker's sneer. Social media boiled over. The clip was reposted millions of times, tagged with a simple, searing caption: "Black single mother, FBI agent, arrested for existing." The outrage was relentless. Civil rights leaders demanded accountability. Commentators on both coasts condemned the abuse. Ordinary citizens, mothers and fathers, veterans and teachers, added their voices. "This could have been me. This could have been my children." Within days, Henderson and Whitaker were fired from the force. Soon after, federal prosecutors announced charges: unlawful arrest, abuse of authority, civil rights violations rooted in racial discrimination. Their downfall was total, swift and irrevocable. For Amara Lewis, vindication came not in headlines but in the quiet moment that followed. She sat on the front steps of her modest brick townhouse, the evening sun washing gold across the street. Jordan leaned against her right side, his small head resting on her arm. Caleb curled into her lap, his breathing slow and steady, finally calm. The chaos of the past days seemed far away, replaced by the warmth of their bodies pressed close. She stroked Caleb's hair, smoothing the curls back from his forehead. Her voice was soft, a whisper meant only for her boys. "I promised I'd protect you. Today, I kept that promise." Jordan shifted, looking up at her with eyes too old for his age. "They won't take us again?" "No," she said firmly, kissing the crown of his head. "Not ever again." The words carried weight beyond comfort. They were a vow carved out of fire, tempered by everything they had endured. But the private peace was not the end. The public still awaited her voice. A press conference was called at FBI headquarters. Rows of reporters filled the room, cameras rolling, lights glaring. At the podium stood Amara, no longer in the plain clothes she had worn at the park, but in her formal bureau suit. The same woman, but steadier, more luminous in the spotlight that had found her. Her sons watched from the front row, sitting beside a female colleague who kept a protective hand on their shoulders. They were dressed neatly, their eyes wide, pride and relief mingling in their young faces. Amara adjusted the microphone. Her throat tightened, but she forced herself to breathe evenly. When she spoke, her voice was calm, deliberate, carrying both pain and strength. "I am grateful for the support I've received, but let me be clear. I don't want respect only because I am an FBI agent. I want respect because I am a human being." A murmur swept the room, the kind that comes when words cut to the core. "I want my sons to grow up in a country where justice is not filtered through the color of their skin, where a black mother holding her children is seen for what she is, a mother, not a suspect, not a threat, a mother." Her eyes glistened. She did not wipe away the tears. She let them fall, proof of both the wound and the resolve that had come from it. She closed with words that echoed beyond the walls of the press room. "True justice cannot depend on badges or uniforms. It must depend on humanity. And until that is real for every person in this nation, my work is not finished." The room erupted in applause, not the shallow kind that fills silence, but the thunderous affirmation of truth spoken aloud. The video did not fade. It lived on, archived, studied, taught in classrooms and legal seminars as a case study of abuse and accountability. For Henderson and Whitaker, the image of their humiliation outside the precinct remained inescapable, their names etched into the record of misconduct. For Amara, the image that endured was different. Her kneeling on the precinct floor, arms wrapped around Jordan and Caleb, reclaiming them in defiance of every force that tried to tear them apart. That photograph, snapped by a journalist, appeared on magazine covers and campaign posters. It became a symbol, not of victimhood, but of endurance, of the unbreakable bond between a mother and her children, and the power of truth against prejudice. Life moved forward. Cases resumed. The Bureau's work continued. But for Amara Lewis, nothing would ever erase the night she became both victim and witness, both target and emblem. On her porch in the evenings, she still held her sons close. The world might call her an agent, an activist, a symbol. But to Jordan and Caleb, she was simply Mom, the woman who had promised to protect them and had proven it in the hardest way possible. And that, she knew, was the only title that truly mattered. Message. Sometimes justice isn't found in courtrooms or headlines. Sometimes it begins in the rawest moments, when a mother refuses to bow, when children cling to her side, when prejudice exposes itself under the brightest light. Amara Lewis's story reminds us that dignity is not granted by a badge, nor erased by insult. It lives in the unshakable truth that every person deserves respect simply because they are human. Her defiance turned humiliation into testimony, and testimony into change. As her sons held fast to her promise of protection, the nation witnessed a larger promise, that justice can prevail when silence is broken. The question left for us is simple. Will we keep building a world where that promise holds?